Right after my husband's funeral, the de Clermont family swiftly had me committed to a psychiatric institution to seize my inheritance. Everyone pitied the confused old woman, Elena, but they had no idea I was not mad at all. In that hospital room, I pretended to take every pill they gave me, only to spit them out and secretly write down their corrupt secrets in the margins of art books. I used to pass leftover food through a fence to an orphan boy named Marco. Years later, that same boy became the lawyer who used the evidence I had gathered to bring the entire de Clermont dynasty to justice. They thought they had silenced me, but they never imagined that a scorned old woman, with the help of a forsaken child, could burn an entire empire to the ground. Now, let me tell you exactly how I did it. My name is Elena Moretti. In this coastal town, people call me Nonna Elena, the owner of the small cafe on the corner of the piazza. They see an 82-year-old woman, gentle, sometimes forgetful, a lucky survivor of the downfall of the mighty de Clermont family. They are half right. I am a survivor, but it was not luck. I remember the day after my husband's funeral, as if it were yesterday. The de Clermont family gave me no time to grieve. They handed me a piece of paper and had me committed to a psychiatric institution to seize my inheritance. Everyone pitied the confused old woman, Elena, but they had no idea I was not mad at all. In that hospital room, I pretended to take every pill they gave me, only to spit them out and secretly write down their corrupt secrets in the margins of art books. I remember passing leftover food through a fence to an orphan boy named Marco, and I also remember, years later, that same boy standing before the court as a lawyer, using the evidence I had collected to bring the entire de Clermont family to justice. They thought they could silence me, but they never imagined that a scorned old woman, with the help of a forsaken child, could burn an entire empire to the ground. Now that it is all in the past, let me tell you the story of how I did it, which begins not in the institution but long before, in a humble vineyard under the Italian sun. My story does not begin in the psychiatric ward, but much earlier, in a poor vineyard under the Italian Sunday. My father was a winemaker. His hands were perpetually stained with soil and the purple of grape skins. We did not have much money, but I had something else. I had talent. I could draw. I could sculpt. Everyone in the village said so. Then, one day, I received a letter. It was a full scholarship to the prestigious art school in Florence. It was my ticket out of poverty. In Florence, I met Lorenzo. He was a young, gifted conductor. His hands danced across the piano keys, creating melodies so beautiful they could break your heart. We fell in love. A pure, youthful love. We walked together along the Arno River, dreaming of a future where art was everything. I thought I had found my world, but I was mistaken. Lorenzo's family, members of the upper class, discovered our relationship. They would not accept a daughter-in-law whose father was a winemaker. They met with him in private and delivered an ultimatum: me or their fortune and status. Lorenzo chose his family. I remember the day he said goodbye, as if it were yesterday. We were sitting in our usual cafe. He could not look me in the eye. He just said, "Elena, we do not belong together. Our worlds are too different." That was the first time I learned that in their world, love was less important than a contract. I did not cry. I just sat there, watching him stand up and walk away. That night, I quietly packed my belongings, left Florence, and vowed to myself that I would never again let anyone look down on my origins. That vow led me to the de Clermont family. I met Bastien, their second son, at an art exhibition. He lacked Lorenzo's talent, but he possessed a powerful name, de Clermont. For that name, I agreed to marry him. I told myself it was a strategic alliance, a way to obtain the status I believed I deserved. As I walked through the iron gates of the de Clermont estate, I thought I had won, but I quickly learned the truth. To them, I was not a family member, but a mere ornament to be displayed. My purpose was simple: produce a male heir. My mother-in-law, Madame Isabel, was a woman of steel who never called me by my name. To her, I was simply that Italian girl. One day, I bought a red dress, and she remarked, "The de Clermonts do not wear that colour. It is too ostentatious. The next day, the dress had vanished from my closet. I understood then that I had not entered a family. I had entered a cage. Then Bastien died in a car accident. I was not even given time to properly mourn, because immediately after the funeral, the de Clermonts made their move. They feared that I, the Italian girl, would use my husband's death to claim a share of the inheritance. They did not cast me out. Instead, they did something far crueler. They used their money to forge a medical file, signed by the family's own private physician. The diagnosis was stark: nervous breakdown, detached from reality, not of sound mind. They then sent me to a sanatorium in Switzerland. It was a beautiful place, with gardens and a lake, but it was a prison. I still remember the day my mother-in-law saw me off. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her face an emotionless mask. "This is for the best, Elena," she said, and it was the first time she had ever used my name, to avoid scandal for the family, and to ensure you are cared for. I could have screamed. I could have struggled. I could have told the world they were lying. But as the heavy iron gate slammed shut behind me, a cold, clear thought formed in my mind. I made a choice. I chose silence, because I realized that when they think you are mad, they stop being cautious. They will discuss secrets in front of you, assuming you do not understand. They will toss important documents into the wastebasket without a second thought. When they believe you are utterly harmless, that is precisely when you become most dangerous. And that is when my true war began. I started to feign confusion. I began to speak nonsense. I became submissive. And I began to observe everything. In that place they called a sanatorium, I became a ghost. I learned to move silently through the corridors. I learned to sit for hours on a garden bench, my gaze fixed vacantly on a tree, while my ears absorbed everything. They no longer saw me as a threat. To the nurses, I was just a harmless patient. To the de Clermont family, I was a secret safely buried. And so, they became careless. When my mother-in-law visited, she would often sit in the drawing room making important phone calls. She spoke of real estate transactions, of funds that needed to be handled. She thought I was busy talking to the roses, but I heard every word. When Bastien's younger brother came, he would complain about his wife and boast of his young mistress. He spoke with the doctor, believing I was lost in my own world. But I memorized every name, every date. I read the letters they discarded in the drawing room wastebasket. Illicit love letters, suspicious invoices. I had no pen and paper, but I had my books. The de Clermonts had allowed me to keep my art library, thinking it a final, harmless remnant of a broken mind. They were wrong. Using a small needle, I pricked tiny symbols only I could understand into the margins of the pages. I documented everything on the inside covers of the books, using a homemade, nearly invisible ink. The book on the life of Caravaggio became my ledger of their tax evasion. The catalogue of Bernini's sculptures held the names and addresses connected to extramarital affairs and unacknowledged children. My small library, my last solace, became an archive of their crimes. Each book was a chapter in the story of the de Clermont's decay, and I was the sole librarian. After 5 years, they decided I was completely harmless. The doctor declared my condition stabilized, meaning I had accepted my confused fate. The de Clermont family released me. They gave me a monthly allowance, an amount small enough to be restrictive but large enough for them to claim they were still caring for me. The only condition was that I live in this small coastal town, far from Paris, far from any seat of power. The people in this town looked at me with pity. They knew my story, or rather, the version the de Clermonts had crafted. Poor Mrs. Moretti, they would whisper behind my back, once a great lady, and now her mind is gone. I used that allowance, along with a few small pieces of jewelry I had managed to hide away, to do something no one expected. I opened a small cafe on the corner of the piazza. People scoffed. They said the confused old woman was playing at being a businesswoman. They came to my cafe not for the quality of the coffee, but out of curiosity to watch me fail. But they did not know the truth. This cafe, Il Ponte, the bridge, was more than just a cafe. It was a legitimate business. I had taught myself accounting during my years in the sanatorium, devouring every economics book I could get my hands on. Il Ponte was my perfect cover. It was a place where I could legally conduct small financial transactions without raising suspicion. I used the profits from the cafe to buy and sell minor works of art. I would purchase an anonymous painting at a local auction and sell it to a collector abroad for a modest profit. Little by little, I moved my money out of France. I was rebuilding my own financial empire, right under the noses of the de Clermont family, and before the very eyes of my pitying neighbours. They saw only an old woman who served coffee and often forgot her customers' names. They did not see a woman silently preparing for her final battle. And then, the de Clermont family made a mistake. Their greed went too far. They planned to acquire our town's small art museum. It was not a grand institution, but it held the soul of our region. Paintings by local artists, ancient artifacts, heirlooms from our ancestors. Their plan was simple: demolish the museum and build a luxury resort on the coastline. I learned of this plot through a conversation I overheard in my cafe. I heard two local officials whispering about a major investor and an offer that is impossible to refuse. I knew it was time to act. I did not reveal myself. I selected a small but damning piece of evidence from my archives, a record of the de Clermont family using a shell company to bribe a regional planning official. I sent it in an unmarked envelope to the best lawyer in town. The revelation caused a minor stir. But what truly stunned everyone was when the lawyer who took the case, a sharp, powerful young man named Marco, announced to the press that he had solid evidence from a respected citizen who wishes to remain anonymous. The town buzzed with speculation. Who was this respected citizen? No one suspected the confused old woman at the Il Ponte Café. But I knew Marco. I remembered years ago, while I was still confined in the sanatorium in Switzerland. There was an orphan boy who used to linger outside the fence. He was thin and always hungry. Sometimes I would sneak a piece of bread or cheese from my meal and pass it to him through a gap in the fence. We never spoke. I would simply give, and he would take, offering a small nod of thanks. That boy was Marco. It turned out he had been adopted by a kind family, had studied diligently, and had become a brilliant lawyer. He had not forgotten the mysterious old woman from all those years ago. I had learned a valuable lesson. Kindness, no matter how small and uncalculated, can sometimes be the most profitable investment of all. Of course, the de Clermont family did not remain idle. Blindsided by the attack, they launched a ferocious counter-offensive. They deployed their formidable legal team to dismiss the allegations. They used their media influence to spin a different narrative, that of a bitter, confused old woman fabricating stories for revenge. They painted me as the aggressor and themselves as the victims. I knew that a single piece of evidence was not enough to topple an empire. It was time for me to step out of the shadows. I did something that no one, not even Marco, could have anticipated. I held a press conference right in my own small cafe. The journalists arrived in droves, curious to see what the confused old woman would say. The de Clermonts sent their own representatives, ready to document my every nonsensical word to use against me. I emerged, shedding my customary air of confusion. I stood tall, my eyes meeting the crowd directly, my voice clear and firm. First, I released more evidence. Not one piece, but a torrent. Bank statements, shady contracts, incriminating letters. My secret archive was open to the world for the first time. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. But then, I did something even more shocking. As silence fell, I looked directly into the cameras and spoke. But I am not here today just to speak of their crimes. I am here to speak of my own. A hush fell over the room. When I was young, after being forced into the sanatorium, I had to find a way to survive and secretly raise my son. In those desperate years, I became involved in a network that trafficked antiquities. I helped them smuggle small works of art out of the country in exchange for money. I was wrong, and I will pay the price for my actions. To the astonishment of everyone present, I announced my act of atonement. The entire fortune that I have legally earned from this cafe, and my other business ventures, I declared, will be used to establish the Moretti Art Scholarship Fund. This fund will be dedicated to talented, abandoned children. Children like Marco once was, to give them the opportunities I never had. The public was both astounded and impressed. With a single confession, I had neutralized any attack the de Clermonts could launch against my past. My candor disarmed them, and my act of redemption elevated my moral standing. I was no longer a pitiable victim. I was a complex woman who had made mistakes but was prepared to confront and atone for them. After that press conference, the collapse was swift. Under the weight of public opinion, irrefutable evidence, and my powerful confession, the de Clermont empire began to fracture. Government investigations were launched. Business partners withdrew. The secrets they had buried for generations were finally unearthed. They did not fall from a single blow, but from the crushing weight of their own lies. A few months later, the town's art museum was saved. A grand ceremony was held in the piazza to honor those who had fought to protect the town's heritage. I was there, just an old woman lost in the crowd. On stage, following the mayor's speech, Marco, the lawyer, stepped forward. He announced he had a special message from the respected citizen who had initiated it all. At my request, he made public a portion of my living will. Marco's voice rang out, clear and strong. My entire remaining fortune, along with any assets recovered from the de Clermont family through legal action, would be endowed to a new foundation, the Moretti Justice Fund. Its purpose was to provide legal and financial support to victims of corporate corruption and the abuse of power. But the final clause was what truly shook the town. A special portion of the assets would be dedicated to the lifelong care of a woman whose name was then read aloud. It was the name of my father-in-law's first wife, a woman they had forced into an asylum and long forgotten another outsider, just like me. The de Clermont family received nothing. Their legacy was now being used to heal the very wounds they had inflicted. I finish my story, returning to the present moment in the cafe. The young journalist's coffee is long cold. He is looking at me, not with the prying eyes of a reporter, but with reverence. A legacy is not what you leave for your family, I say calmly. A legacy is the justice you leave for the world. I look out the window. The sun is setting over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange. A few children are playing in the piazza. All is peaceful. I smile. My game of chess is over. The young journalist has been gone for some time. I remain seated, alone in the closed cafe. The warm yellow light casts long shadows of the empty tables and chairs against the wall. I am no longer a warrior. My war ended the day I saw my name, Moretti, engraved on the doors of the Art Scholarship Fund. Last week I received a letter from one of the first recipients. She is an orphan girl with an extraordinary gift for painting. She wrote that she would study hard so that one day she could paint her mother's smile from memory. Reading her words, I wept. Not tears of sorrow, but of fulfillment. Marco still visits from time to time. He is now a renowned lawyer, the head of the Moretti Justice Fund. He is no longer the scrawny boy from long ago, but in his eyes, I still see the child who accepted bread through a fence. He tells me of the cases they have won, of the families they have helped. He is the living embodiment of my legacy. As for the woman from my will, the forgotten first wife of the de Clermont patriarch, she passed away peacefully a few years later. The fund ensured her final years were lived in comfort and dignity. I was able, at least, to grant her the peace that was denied to me for so long. Sometimes, I still think of Lorenzo, my first love. I heard he became a celebrated conductor, though he lives a solitary life. I no longer feel resentment, only a sense of pity for a man who chose status over love. He taught me my first lesson about the world I was about to face. I stand and walk behind the counter. I pour myself a glass of red wine, the kind my father used to make. I raise my glass toward the blank wall, where my map of crimes once resided. Now, it is just a clean, white wall. The past no longer haunts me. It is simply a story of a poor girl from a vineyard, a spurned wife, an old woman dismissed as mad. A woman who lost everything, only to reclaim it all through her own intellect and patience, not for herself, but for those who would come after. I take a sip of the wine. The familiar tart flavor of the grapes fills my mouth. It is the taste of a beginning, and also the taste of an end.